So I have this shirt here. It does fit my daughter. I'm going to use this as my pattern piece. You don't have to do this. You can measure the child that you want to make the dress for, but I just thought this would be the easiest route to take. I'm just cutting down all of the seams. I am going to cut off this other sleeve, but I don't need to open it up because I can use this piece for both of the arms. So I have this stained shirt now cut into pieces. I have a back pattern piece, a front piece. I have an open sleeve that I'm going to use twice to make both sides of the sleeves. And then I do have one cut just in case I want to use it. And you can always just flip it over and trace on the other side. I'm going to take these pieces and I'm going to trace them on the material I want for my daughter's dress. I am going to do one back, one front, and 2 sleeves. So here are the pieces cut out for the dress. For the skirt, I did measure my daughter. I did 14 inches across and about 15 and a half down. And the reason for this is because I will lose a few inches with the hem. And so I wanted to make sure that the dress was going to be long enough for her. So my next step is I'm going to use these pieces. I'm going to iron them and I'm going to cut out the lining and sew the lining on around. I'm going to be hemming the dress first before I put it together. So I'm going to hem the top, I'm going to hem the sleeves, the bottom of the skirt, and then I will sew up the side seams before I attach the sleeves. Because I'm not doing a liner for the sleeves, I am going to hem them before I sew the seams of the edges. So to make the hem and to make sure it's nice and even, I'm just going to use the iron since it's out and fold up the lining. That way it has a nice, even, seamless line to it. I want to make sure both of my sleeves are the same length and the hem is roughly the same measurement. So I just placed the second sleeve over top and I'm just going to create the same hem. So this is my length of my dress and this is the width. So I'm going to create what I did with the sleeves by making a crease for the hem. So when I traced around the fabric for the lining, I cut on the inside of the pen line. That way I made the lining a little bit shorter. What I'm going to do is sew around this, turn it inside out, and then I will hem it. Something you want to keep in mind for your bodice is for the back and the front, I made it big enough to slip over her head, but it depends on how stretchy your fabric is that you're using. You might want to add a zipper or buttons. Another thing to keep in mind is if you are using cotton material especially, you might want to wash your material beforehand so that it already shrinks and you can account for that when you do your measurements. So something that I mentioned but I did not do but I did place in the step-by-step instructions on the blog post was hemming the lace to the top neckline of the bodice. I did not do that till after, and that was a big regret. So definitely hem your neckline first before you attach your bodice pieces. I am just pinning down the sides of the lining that has already been sewed on. That way my hem can be nice and flat and you don't see the liner underneath. So I have this really pretty lace that I also bought from Hobby Lobby, and I want to add it to the ends of the sleeve, and then I will add it around the inside collar part of the dress. So I'm just trying to figure out how much of this lace I want sticking out. I think I want just a short amount, so I'm going to cut it right at the end of the little design right here. What I'm going to do is I've already ironed where I want the hem. I have it pinned, and I'm going to hem across with this and then turning the sleeve inside out so that the good side is facing in. I'm going to sew up this edge here, leaving the sleeve part that attaches to the bodice open. Actually changed my sewing setting to number 26 right here, kind of this zigzag setting, and I'm going to do that for for the sleeve, for putting the sleeve onto the bodice, and then once I get the skirt together, putting the skirt onto the bodice as well. So I flipped my bodice inside out, and all I did was take my sleeve again inside out, and I've just attached it with pins all the way around. This part is a little bit trickier because this is a 3D piece, so it's not going to lay flat, and you can't sew it as flat as the other pieces and the liner and everything else that we have done so far. I'm going to do a similar thing. I'm going to first go around with a straight stitch all the way around, do a front and back stitch, make sure you back stitch, and then I'm going to go back through with the same zigzag stitch. That way I know the sleeve is not going to come off the bodice. Once I do the straight stitch, I can take out the pins and not worry about the sleeve moving or coming off. Everything should stay put. So what I'm doing, because this piece doesn't fit underneath the sewing machine, is I'm just sewing it on in sections. So I did the first section right here to get the sleeve on, and now I'm going to try to do this section because I don't want this underneath part to scoop underneath and also get sewn in. After I sewed on the sleeves, I decided I wanted to add a few lace pieces to match the sleeves and then eventually the top neckline. I decided to overlap two pieces, sew them together, and then I iron them flat so that the edges face towards the sleeves. the pieces of the skirt, and I'm going to do the same thing. I decided I wanted to add lace here, just like how last minute I decided I wanted to add lace on the bodice. So I hemmed it, ironed, or I folded it, ironed it, and now I'm going to run a straight stitch all the way across, and then I'm going to run another straight stitch all the way around, just to make sure that the fabric liner stays flat with the beautiful outside fabric. So I just lined up the pieces of the skirt. I have pinched the sides together, pinned it. I made sure that the bottoms were perfectly aligned, as well as the lace. And now I'm just going to sew with the zigzag stitch. So I'm going to sew a straight stitch first. Make sure that you do a front and back stitch on both ends, and then I'm going to do a zigzag to close it off. So I'm going to create a gathering stitch now with my skirt. So instead of creating the seam on the other side, I want to create a gathering stitch all together at the top, and then after it has been gathered, I will sew the seam down. You can sew the seam first. This is just what I prefer. So in order to do this, I'm going to take the tension. Right now my machine is set at 4, and I'm going to turn it all the way up to 9, and then I'm going to make my stitch length as wide as it can go, or as long as it can go. So right now my stitches, if you think about it, is like dot, 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 as close as it can be. I don't know how to explain it super well. And so I want it to be a dot, 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 as far away as possible, so that we can take the thread and we can gather it together. Our goal is we are going to bunch up the skirt. I don't want it to be super bunchy and ruffled. I just want it to be bunched enough that it fits the width of our bodice. So it just needs gathered a little bit. So if you wanted to make a full-on ruffle, you would probably want to bunch it a lot more than what we're going to do. I don't want it to be a straight skirt. I want it to be gathered a little bit. But this type of fabric, I don't believe looks as good gathered, or at least for the dress that we are making. So I'm going to create the gathering stitch. Do not back stitch. We don't want this stitch to stay. We'll end up using it to ruffle up, and then we're going to pull it out after we have created a straight stitch through our gather. So I am going to turn mine up. The highest mine goes is 5, and I'm going to make longer stitches. So you can see that it already created a natural bunch. So it actually might be close to where we're wanting, but we can pull on these strings on the side to bunch it up even more, because you can see right here, this is a super bunched up, and then right here is not. So we want to make sure our bunch or our gather is even throughout. We also want to make sure that it aligns with the width of our bodice. So I have the gather and the bodice at the same width. So what I'm going to do is create a straight stitch over top of this to try and keep the gather. If you go too low, your gather will fall out, and if you go too high, it will also fall out. So you want to pretty much follow the exact stitch that you did for your gathering stitch. Don't forget to change your settings and tension back to normal. Okay, my kids have joined me, I'm sorry. For the last step, we are placing the skirt, sewing the skirt onto the bodice. What I'm going to do is I have both of them flipped inside out because we want our right sides to go together. So I am taking the top part of the skirt and the top part of the bodice, and I'm just going to pinch them together like so, and I'm going to pin all along here. So following my straight stitch that I already have, and then I'm going to do the other side. And then when we're all done, we'll flip it over and you won't be able to see these folds. So here is where I add the lace to the front bodice neckline. I wish I would have done this way before finishing the rest of the dress, but I decided against the lace and then I decided for the lace. But I am folding over the edges to give it a nice hem, and while I hem it, I'm going to be sewing on the lace pieces. I ironed the lace pieces up and cut the excess trim of the lace on the inside because my daughter did say that it was itchy. This actually is the finishing touch that completes our linen dress, and then we are going to jump into the apron tutorial. I'm just going to measure my daughter for the exact measurements I need for this dress. If you want, a sizing chart is available on my blog at westmanacademyhomeschool.com. I have all of my apron pieces cut out. I have 4 pieces that I'm going to be using for the ties. I'm going to sew 1 piece on to the front, on each side, and on the back on each side. What I'm going to do is fold them over and iron it so that it stays in place so I can easily sew a straight line. I will flip them inside out and go ahead and hem around the entire piece so that it lays flat and looks nice. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to use the iron, fold over little pieces. Because I don't have a liner for this, I'm just going to create my creases to make my hem. That way everything looks finished off. I have 2 bodice pieces, 2 skirt pieces, and again, 4 of the tie pieces. I am hemming around the neckline and the arm pieces of the bodice, and then I will start on the ties. I use a zigzag stitch because when you turn the tie inside out, a straight stitch is more than likely going to break. Then I am just going to hem around the tie after I have turned it inside out. That way everything lays flat. After setting my stitch length and tension to high, I have created a gathering stitch. After you create a gathering stitch for your skirt, just like we did with the linen skirt pieces, you want to make sure you set your settings back down to normal to create the straight stitch in order to keep those ruffles together. Then I just attached the top shoulder bodice pieces. Once you have attached the shoulder pieces of your bodice, make sure you are not stitching together the sides of the skirt or the bodice. I'm just going to take my gathering stitch and I'm going to pull that fabric inward. I want to create enough ruffle that the width of the skirt becomes the same width as the bodice. Once you have done this, you can create that straight stitch. Make sure you are front and back stitching so that it doesn't come out. And then you can attach the skirt to the bodice. The last step of our apron dress is just adding those tie pieces. You want to place the tie piece right on the inside hem of the bodice. Try and follow that hemline, and that's it. Our apron dress is complete. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you learned something. You can follow the step-by-step instructions at westmanacademyhomeschool.com.